Residents thought a skyscraper was flooding. Water thundered down the side of a 35-story tower. Emergency calls flooded in, and reporters rushed to the scene expecting a disaster. But nothing had burst. It was a massive, engineered waterfall, switched on intentionally for the first time. Today we'll uncover how it works, why it was built, and the surprising reason this breathtaking feature is almost never turned on. The wall of water. The numbers do not quite register the first time you hear them. The waterfall plunges 108 meters, or 354 feet, in one continuous, uninterrupted sheet of water, cascading down the face of the building. On paper, it is just a measurement, but in reality, the scale is difficult to comprehend. To put it into something you can actually picture, imagine the Statue of Liberty from the bottom of its pedestal to the very tip of the torch. Then replace the entire structure with nothing but rushing water. That is roughly the height involved. It is not a gentle stream, a decorative fountain, or a small architectural feature added to impress hotel guests. It is a towering, vertical wall of water, stretching the height of a skyscraper in its own right, pouring relentlessly from above, with enough volume and visual force to dominate the entire building, transforming what could have been an ordinary facade into something that feels more like a natural wonder than a man-made structure. And here is the detail that makes it genuinely hard to picture. This is widely considered the tallest artificial waterfall ever built onto a building anywhere on Earth. There are taller waterfalls in the world, but they are natural, carved by rivers over millions of years. There are other man-made water features, but they are added to dams, or river networks, or wide open landscapes. This one is different. This one is strapped to the face of a tower, standing in the middle of a dense downtown, surrounded by traffic and offices and apartments, in a spot where a waterfall has absolutely no natural business being. The building it pours from is called the Liebian International Building. It stands in Guiyang, the capital of Guizhou Province, deep in the southwest of China. The tower itself is 121 meters tall, around 22 floors, and it is a mixed-use skyscraper, meaning it was built to hold several completely different things stacked inside one structure. There is a shopping mall, there are office floors, there is a luxury hotel. On paper, it is an ordinary commercial high-rise, the kind you would walk past in any large Chinese city without a second glance. Except that one entire face of it is a waterfall. And to understand how that is even possible, you have to understand what is happening behind the glass. Because a waterfall does not just fall for free. The wall of water. Behind that dramatic curtain of water is an engineering system far more complex than most people imagine. Unlike a natural waterfall, which is constantly fed by rivers and gravity, every drop you see on the Liebian International Building has to be lifted to the top before it can fall again. Hidden inside the structure are massive storage tanks, industrial-grade pumps, filters, and a network of heavy-duty pipes that continuously recycle the same water in a closed loop. The waterfall is, in effect, a giant vertical fountain operating on the side of a skyscraper. That immediately raises the obvious question: how much energy does something like this consume? Lifting thousands of tons of water more than 100 meters into the air requires an enormous amount of electricity. Running the system continuously would be extraordinarily expensive, not to mention difficult to maintain. The pumps must overcome gravity every second the waterfall is operating, while filtration systems remove debris and prevent algae from turning the crystal-clear cascade into a green, murky mess. Even wind becomes an engineering challenge, because a strong gust can push millions of droplets away from the building and onto nearby streets below. Those practical realities explain why, despite the waterfall becoming one of the most photographed landmarks in Guiyang, it is rarely switched on for long periods. Instead, the building's owners reserve it for special occasions, holidays, celebrations, and promotional events, transforming it from a permanent feature into a carefully choreographed spectacle. And that decision sparked a debate that continues to this day. Was the Liebian International Building an extraordinary feat of engineering that successfully blended nature with modern architecture? Or was it one of the world's most expensive architectural gimmicks? Supporters argue that the waterfall transformed an otherwise ordinary skyscraper into an internationally recognized landmark, bringing attention to Guiyang and celebrating the natural beauty of Guizhou in a way no conventional design ever could. Critics see something very different, an eye-catching spectacle that consumes significant resources for little practical benefit, operating only occasionally while serving primarily as a marketing attraction. The engineering itself is difficult to dispute. What remains controversial is whether such an ambitious idea was ever worth the enormous cost of keeping it alive. How you hang a waterfall on a building. Water does not want to be at the top of a skyscraper. Gravity spends all day pulling it back down. So the single biggest engineering problem with a feature like this is not the falling part. The falling part is easy. The hard part is getting all that water back up to the top, over and over, without stopping. The system is powered by 4 massive industrial-grade pumps, engineered to operate continuously under heavy loads. Their sole purpose is to move enormous volumes of water from a collection basin at the base of the tower all the way to a release point. 108 meters, or 354 feet, above the ground. From there, gravity takes over as the water spills over the edge and begins its uninterrupted descent down the face of the building. When it reaches the bottom, it does not disappear into a drain or flow away. Instead, it is captured in a specially designed reservoir, filtered, and immediately sent back through the pumping system to begin the journey again. The entire process repeats around the clock in a carefully controlled closed-loop cycle, minimizing water waste while maintaining the illusion of an endless natural cascade. What visitors experience as a spectacular waterfall is actually only the visible half of an enormous engineered circulation system, with the pumps, pipes, reservoirs, filters, and control equipment hidden deep inside the building, quietly working together to create what appears to be effortless flowing water. Now think about how much water that actually is. To keep an unbroken sheet falling 108 meters, wide enough to look like a real waterfall, you need an enormous, constant volume moving through those pumps every second. That water has to come from somewhere, and the people who built this were not about to run city drinking water down the side of a building for show. So they engineered the supply around collected rainwater and recycled runoff, stored in underground tanks at the base of the structure. When the region gets rain, and this part of China gets plenty, those tanks fill. The waterfall, in theory, drinks from the sky. That is the clever part. It sounds almost sustainable when you describe it that way. Falling rainwater, collected, reused, sent back up, dropped again, a perfect loop. But there is a catch hiding inside that loop, and it is the reason this spectacular feature spends almost all of its life switched off. We will get to that, because it is the whole twist of this story. First, you need to know why anyone wanted a waterfall on a skyscraper at all. How you hang a waterfall on a building. Because from a purely practical standpoint, it makes almost no sense. Skyscrapers are normally designed to maximize usable floor space, reduce operating costs, and simplify maintenance. Every additional system inside a high-rise has to justify its existence. Elevators move people. Air conditioning keeps the building habitable. Fire suppression systems save lives. A 108-meter waterfall accomplishes none of those things. It occupies valuable engineering space, requires constant maintenance, and adds another layer of complexity to an already sophisticated structure. Which means the waterfall was never intended to solve an engineering problem. It was designed to solve a marketing one. In an era when dozens of new skyscrapers compete for attention in rapidly growing Chinese cities, simply being tall is no longer enough. Architects and developers increasingly look for a signature feature, something that makes a building instantly recognizable in photographs and impossible to confuse with any other tower on the skyline. Some buildings twist, others rotate, glow with massive LED displays, or feature rooftop gardens. The Liebian International Building chose flowing water, and in that respect, the project succeeded almost immediately. Long before most people knew the building's name, they knew it as the skyscraper with the waterfall. Videos spread across social media, tourists came to see it for themselves, and the tower became one of Guiyang's most recognizable landmarks. The real question was never whether people noticed it, They absolutely did. Within months of its completion, videos and photographs of the waterfall had spread across social media and international news outlets, turning the building into one of Guiyang's most recognizable landmarks. From a publicity standpoint, the project succeeded beyond almost anyone's expectations. Millions of people who had never heard of the city suddenly knew it as the place with the skyscraper waterfall. But attention alone does not pay operating costs. Once the excitement of the opening faded, a far more difficult question remained. Was the global publicity, tourist interest, and architectural prestige enough to justify the enormous expense of building, operating, and maintaining one of the most ambitious water features ever attached to a skyscraper? That is the question architects, engineers, and critics continue to debate today. Why a waterfall of all things? To make sense of this, you have to understand the place it was built. Guizhou is not a flat industrial plain. It is one of the most rugged, mountainous, green provinces in all of China. It is a land of forests, cliffs, mist, and rivers. In fact, Guizhou is famous across the country for having one of the largest clusters of natural waterfalls anywhere in China, including some of the most beautiful and powerful falls in the entire nation. If you grew up in this province, water crashing down a mountainside is not exotic. It is home. It is the sound of the place. Now drop a modern city into the middle of that landscape. Guiyang is a fast-growing capital, packed with concrete towers, glass facades, and busy roads. The same downtown core you would find in any rapidly expanding Chinese city. And somewhere in the planning of this particular building, an idea took hold. What if, right in the heart of all that concrete, you could give people back the one thing the mountains were famous for, the feeling of standing near falling water, surrounded by mist and the roar of it, even while standing in the middle of a business district? According to a director from the group behind the project, that was the architect's vision from the very beginning. The surrounding region is famous for its dramatic mountains, dense forests, and spectacular waterfalls, landscapes that have defined the area's identity for generations. Rather than constructing another glass and steel tower disconnected from its surroundings, the design team wanted the building itself to reflect the natural environment that makes Guizhou unique. Their goal was to recreate the sensation of standing beside one of the province's famous waterfalls, right in the middle of a dense urban skyline, allowing people surrounded by high-rise buildings to experience the sights and sounds normally associated with the mountains beyond the city. That was the central idea behind the project. Bring the mountain into the city, replace the usual soundtrack of traffic with the sound of rushing water, and give downtown visitors a reminder of the natural landscape for which the province is genuinely famous. It is a romantic idea. It is also, as it turns out, an incredibly expensive one. And that gap between the beautiful intention and the brutal running cost is where this whole story turns. Why a waterfall of all things? The reality is that inspiration is the inexpensive part of architecture. Sketching a bold concept on paper costs almost nothing. Convincing investors to fund it is harder. Turning that vision into concrete, steel, and glass is harder still. Yet the greatest challenge begins only after construction crews leave and the grand opening is over. That is the moment when architecture stops being an artistic statement and becomes a business that has to justify its operating costs every single day. A waterfall carved into a mountainside exists thanks to gravity alone. Water falls downhill without pumps, without electrical systems, and without a maintenance crew standing by. Nature provides the power, and it does so for free. A waterfall attached to the side of a skyscraper works by an entirely different set of rules. Every drop of water reaching the top has been lifted there by machinery. Every minute the waterfall operates, industrial pumps consume electricity. Every hour, filtration systems work to remove dirt, algae, and debris. Every month, technicians inspect pipes, seals, bearings, valves, and control systems to ensure the entire circulation network continues operating safely and efficiently. Unlike a natural waterfall, this one cannot simply exist. It has to be manufactured, moment by moment, every second it is flowing. Behind the spectacular curtain of water that visitors see is a hidden mechanical ecosystem made up of pumps powerful enough to overcome gravity, reservoirs storing thousands of liters of recycled water, filtration equipment keeping the water clear, and sensors constantly monitoring pressure, flow rates, and water levels. If any one of those critical systems stops working, the waterfall disappears almost instantly. That distinction became impossible to ignore almost as soon as the building opened. Visitors arrived expecting to find a permanent waterfall cascading down the tower, only to discover that the facade was often completely dry. Many assumed the feature had broken or been quietly abandoned after the opening ceremony. In reality, nothing was wrong with the engineering. The waterfall worked exactly as designed. The real obstacle was keeping such an extraordinary spectacle running often enough to justify the enormous cost of doing so. Designing the system was an impressive engineering achievement, but operating it day after day proved to be an entirely different challenge. Every hour the pumps ran meant more electricity consumed, more wear on the mechanical equipment, and more maintenance required to keep the entire circulation system functioning safely. Unlike a conventional building feature that quietly serves a practical purpose, this waterfall existed almost entirely for visual impact. That forced the owners to make a difficult calculation every time they considered switching it on. Would the spectacle created for a few minutes, or a few hours, be worth the money it would cost to produce? In the end, that financial reality shaped the waterfall's future far more than its engineering ever did. The number that ruined the dream. Here is the problem nobody in those early plans wanted to say out loud. Lifting that much water, 108 meters into the air, continuously, takes an enormous amount of power. Those 4 pumps are not sipping electricity. They are hauling tons of water skyward every single minute against the full pull of gravity. And that kind of work costs money in a very direct, very unforgiving way. The reported figure is around 800 yuan per hour to run the waterfall. That is roughly 118 US dollars every single hour that the water is flowing. Sit with that number for a second, because on its own, it might not sound catastrophic. But run the math the way the building's owners eventually had to. If you left this waterfall running all day, every day, the way an actual river runs, the electricity bill alone would climb into the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, purely to keep a decorative sheet of water falling down the side of a building. You would be spending the price of a house every year on the privilege of watching waterfall. And this is water that was supposed to cost almost nothing. From the beginning, the entire system was designed to rely primarily on collected rainwater and recycled runoff, ensuring that the water itself would not become an expensive operating expense. In that respect, the concept worked exactly as intended. The water is inexpensive because it is continuously reused rather than constantly replaced. The real cost comes from something far less obvious: moving that water. Every second the waterfall operates, millions of liters must be lifted 108 meters back to the top of the building against gravity, requiring enormous industrial pumps running continuously and consuming substantial amounts of electricity. That relentless cycle of lifting, pumping, and recirculating is what drives the operating costs so high. The waterfall did not become expensive because of the water flowing downward. It became expensive because every drop that falls has to be pushed all the way back up again, over and over, every single day. So the owners eventually made a practical decision that quietly transformed this record-setting attraction into one of the rarest sights in the city. Rather than operating the waterfall on a regular schedule, they dramatically limited when it would be switched on. By many accounts, especially during its early years, the system ran only on a small number of occasions, typically for major holidays, official ceremonies, promotional events, or other moments when the visual impact justified the considerable operating expense. For the vast majority of the year, the pumps remain switched off, the pipes stand idle, and the collection tanks wait beneath the building for the next activation. Without the rushing water, the feature that earned international headlines almost disappears from view. The world's tallest building-mounted artificial waterfall becomes little more than another modern glass skyscraper, blending into the surrounding skyline with few clues that an enormous engineered cascade is hidden inside, ready to come back to life only on those rare occasions when someone decides the spectacle is worth the cost. Which means most people who walk past the Liebian International Building have never actually seen it do the one thing it is famous for. And that scarcity feeds directly into how the public reacted to the whole idea. Because when the waterfall did run, the reaction was not what anyone hoped. Ridicule, leaks, and a country full of critics. Go back to that opening scene, when residents were calling local newspapers convinced that a major water pipe had burst or that part of the building was flooding. That first wave of confusion turned out to be a preview of the reaction that would soon spread across the country. As videos of the waterfall began circulating across Chinese social media, millions of people saw the spectacle for the first time. But instead of responding with amazement or admiration for the engineering involved, many reacted with skepticism, jokes, and criticism. The conversation quickly shifted away from the building's technical achievement and toward questions about practicality, operating costs, and whether such an enormous artificial waterfall made any sense at all. Rather than becoming an instant national icon, the project became the subject of widespread online mockery. People online tore into it. Some pointed out the obvious, that pouring a fortune in electricity down the side of a building to make fake rain in a province already full of real waterfalls was a strange way to spend money. One widely shared comment joked that if the company would just turn the thing on once every few months, they would at least save money on cleaning the windows. Others questioned the environmental logic of running 4 heavy-duty pumps for a purely decorative effect, no matter how the water itself was sourced. The criticism landed hard enough that the building became a national talking point, and not the flattering kind. But to understand why this building drew that much heat, you have to zoom out. Because the Liebian waterfall did not get mocked in isolation. It got caught in the backlash against an entire era of Chinese architecture. For years, as China's economy boomed, its cities filled with attention-grabbing buildings. Developers and local governments were competing for prestige, for headlines, for the eye of the world. And the result was a wave of increasingly unusual structures. There is a skyscraper in Guangzhou, shaped like a giant donut, with a hole punched clean through the middle. There is a hotel elsewhere in China, bent into a horseshoe. There is a building in Suzhou, so distinctively shaped that the public nicknamed it the Big Underpants. There is even the headquarters of the national state broadcaster in Beijing, a futuristic looping tower that earned its own unflattering nickname among locals. All of this ambitious, over-the-top architecture eventually ran headfirst into a changing political climate. Back in 2014, President Xi Jinping publicly criticized what he described as weird architecture, arguing that buildings should prioritize practicality, cultural value, and public benefit instead of pursuing attention-grabbing designs for their own sake. His remarks sent a clear message through China's construction and real estate industries, encouraging architects and developers to move away from extravagant projects whose main purpose was to stand out. That shift in priorities cast a long shadow over the years that followed. So when a skyscraper later appeared with the world's tallest artificial waterfall flowing down its facade, an attraction that reportedly cost a substantial amount each year to operate, it was difficult for many people not to see it as the very type of project those earlier comments had been aimed at. Instead of being viewed solely as an engineering achievement, the building became a symbol of excess, raising questions about practicality, energy consumption, and whether such a costly feature was justified. The timing could hardly have been less favorable. And once images and videos spread online, social media users were quick to point out the irony. turning the waterfall into as much a subject of satire as admiration. The building that mostly stands dry, here is the strange place where this story ultimately ends. The Liebian International Building is, by one very specific measure, a genuine world record holder. As far as anyone has been able to determine, no other building on Earth has ever incorporated an artificial waterfall this tall directly into its facade. That is a legitimate engineering achievement requiring complex structural design, powerful pumping systems, sophisticated water management, and careful planning to make it all work safely. It is not a fake record or a marketing gimmick. It is a real technical accomplishment. And on the relatively rare occasions when the system is switched on, the experience is undeniably spectacular. A towering curtain of water pours down the side of the skyscraper. Cool mist drifts across the plaza. The thunder of falling water echoes between the surrounding high-rise buildings. And for a brief moment, the noise of the city seems to disappear beneath the sound of the cascade. In those few minutes, the architect's original vision finally feels real. Standing at the base of the building, surrounded by glass towers instead of mountains, visitors can briefly experience the illusion of being at the foot of one of Guizhou's famous natural waterfalls, exactly as the designers imagined from the beginning. And then, someone flips the switch. The massive pumps gradually wind down. The roar of falling water begins to fade, and the final sheets of water drain back into the collection tanks hidden beneath the building. Within minutes, the sound disappears, and the towering waterfall becomes nothing more than a dry concrete facade. The very feature that made the building internationally famous spends the overwhelming majority of its life completely switched off. It is not because the system failed, or because the engineering does not work. It is because the same laws of physics that make the spectacle possible also make it incredibly expensive to sustain. Lifting enormous quantities of water 108 meters into the air requires a tremendous and continuous supply of energy, and that energy comes at a significant financial cost. The higher the water has to climb, the more power the pumps consume, and the more expensive every minute of operation becomes. In the end, the waterfall's greatest strength is also its greatest limitation. The engineering works exactly as designed, but the cost of fighting gravity day after day is simply too high to keep the world's tallest artificial waterfall flowing all the time. That is the real story of this place. It is not a story about a leak, even though that is how the city first met it. It is not really a story about a record, even though it holds one. It is a story about the distance between an idea and its electricity bill. Someone looked at a mountainous province famous for its waterfalls, looked at a concrete downtown, and had a genuinely beautiful thought: that you could give a city back its water. The engineering worked. The pumps work. The tanks fill with rain. Every part of the dream functions exactly as designed. It just costs too much to let it run. So the waterfall waits. The pumps sit ready. The rainwater collects in the dark beneath the tower. And every so often, on a special day, someone decides the spectacle is worth the price. And for a little while, the tallest building-mounted waterfall in the world roars back to life, drenches the air with mist, stops traffic, fills phones with videos, and reminds everyone why somebody thought this impossible idea was worth building in the first place. Then it switches off, and the most famous waterfall in the city goes back to being an ordinary glass wall, hiding one of the boldest and most impractical features ever attached to a skyscraper. If this opened your eyes, subscribe and don't miss what's coming next.